This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I'll give it one more minute and then I'll get started. Okay, I think I'll get started. At least with the introduction, and then it gives a little bit more time for people that want to join later. Can you hear me all right? Mark?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, very good. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good early afternoon, I imagine, and good evening for those joining from Europe. So today I'm going to do a presentation, like a webinar, and then we can have some discussion and questions if there's any questions about the reasons that I see why you should consider having a CMS for your developer portal. This is based on some of the material that I've done for a previous presentation that was part of the, should you choose for the integrated portal or should you choose for the Drupal portal as part of an Apogee presentation. I'm not sure. I don't think that, from what I know, that the participants here were part of that webinar. But if you were part of that webinar, there's going to be quite some stuff that will come back. So feel free to drop off at that point or to ask questions before we jump into that. If there's specific things that you would like to ask about. Okay. 11 reasons why you should consider a content management system. And I did a LinkedIn post, I think somewhere late last week, where I kind of gave a very short idea why this is so important, or why I really started thinking about this quite a while ago. About 4 or 5 years ago, even before we started doing developer portals, I started seeing more and more people doing static site generators and microservice architectures and working with Markdown and APIs rather than working with a CMS. And I started getting a bit worried because it felt really like there was this giant wave of change coming to the web space, and it felt a little bit like CMSs were at least being questioned very strongly. Like, should you really use a CMS, or should you use some newfangled JavaScript-based front-end thingy? And yeah, so first it was kind of scary because our whole business is built on Drupal, on this content management system. Or back at the time, we were a Drupal agency, so I started questioning and thinking like, okay, is this like a transformation, and is this a switch that I'm seeing here, or what is happening? And then as I went deeper and deeper into the question, I started realizing that no, actually, there's some part of this complexity, there's some part of this problem space that you can't disentangle. There's there's like a matrix of complexity that needs to overlap And if you're going to, like, even if you start rebuilding this, or even if you start building this in JavaScript, even if you start building it with APIs, you're probably going to end up replicating a lot of this functionality. And then that's not necessarily going to be easier or faster than what's available. And then maybe you just end up owning a very, very complex stack of custom code. And then if that developer who built that goes away, then you end up with a lot of technical debt. And so like a little by little, I thought more about it, and I came to about approximately 11 pieces of complexity that I see in this space, and especially in developer portals. And this is what this presentation is going to be about. But first, a very short introduction. So we're Pronovix. We're a company fully dedicated to developer portals. I know there's other companies that build dev portals, but from what I've seen, most of them are doing it as part of either a website kind of context, so they're website builders and they also build dev portals, or they're an API gateway, like a digital transformation partner, and they also build dev portals. And on the agency side, there's a lack of knowledge about the problem space, and on the dev portal, on the API management side, there's a lack of knowledge about the technical space and the CMS space. So what we wanted to do was to be a specialist in this very narrow field, so that we could help our customers with more than just technical solutions, but also think more about you know, what are the right things to do in a dev portal. Like, you know, you shouldn't have forums unless you have a community manager, things like that might not be common knowledge. And then if you ask an agency to build you your dev portal, they end up just giving you everything you ask them, and you end up with a lot of things that you're probably never going to use. And if you're asking a gateway company, you might end up with something that's suboptimal. So when we tried to be the combination of those two, and to fully specialize on that. We're a partner of Apogee that got acquired by Google. That means that we helped actually Apogee to build their Drupal 8 modules, so we know them inside out. You know, the initial build of the modules was done by us, we've got a lot of experience with support and professional services and so on. If you're an Apogee customer, that means that we've got a solution like that can go really quickly, that we can just take out of the box and use for your portal. If you're not using Apogee, we can also help you, but it's a little bit more work, because we have to work out how we're going to connect with your API gateway to provide like that good key experience. This is our experience. So we've worked with a bunch of different industries. We've worked with a lot of large companies. We also worked with Google, as I said earlier, working on the Drupal 8 modules and a couple of other things. We've won awards with our dev portals. Even before we started the Developer Portal Award, we do a lot of research in a bunch of different communities. We organize events. Next one is going to be in Amsterdam, 10th to 11th of October, together with ABN AMRO. I'm really excited because this year we'll have our first open space event together with API the Docs. Yeah, I just love having peer-to-peer conversations where we can learn from each other. You know, we'll have some presentation style talks also, where you can just listen to a speaker, but we'll also have this peer-to-peer learning where we'll talk about specific subjects together. And we also run the Dev Portal Awards. That's going to be, the gala will be in Amsterdam. This is something I still have it on here, but we're now looking at postponing it, because we didn't realize that this was in the Thanksgiving week, which means that none of the American community members can come. So we're probably going to push this until next year. But this is going to be super, super exciting. If you're an API product owner, you have to be at this event. It's the same thing, open space event, but like 2 days fully dedicated to talking with each other about common problems we have. Yeah, and we're working on a productized way to deliver DevPortals. Okay, so that's for the introduction. I'm going to do something here. What I normally, yeah, I've gotten a lot more outspoken about this. Normally, I don't. I try to always be positive, but I want to talk about 3 anti-patterns. There's only 3, so it's not going to be a presentation only about anti-patterns. I'm going to talk about only 3 anti-patterns and then use them as like an introduction to the different forms of complexity. So I think one of the biggest anti-patterns that I see is teams that build APIs and then don't really have a good dev portal. So they just they have like Swagger UI and they just put their APIs in there. They only have the reference docs, and so I at some point I started referring to this as the API freezer. It's like this idea that instead of having a dev portal that helps you to sell and to show your APIs, you put them like in a little hidden corner, and nobody ever really knows about them and learns about them and can really find out about it. And there's so much friction around the APIs that people don't use them. The other big anti-pattern that I've seen happening with some of our, like, you know, in the API space is the Frankensite. And the Frankensite is a dev portal that's composed of different elements from, like, you know, you take a bunch of different tools. You take like a static site generator. You take some landing pages in HTML or in JavaScript. You take like Swagger UI to show your API references. You maybe have like support thingy, and you kind of fit it all together, but it doesn't really fit completely. It doesn't look exactly the same way because all of these tools have only limited ability to be configured. So you end up with this amalgam of tools that doesn't provide you with a unified experience. Like you go onto these sites, you click on a link, and you're in some other tool, and you don't know anymore how you got there, and then you have to use the back button to go back. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. I believe this is probably one of the biggest anti-patterns that I'm seeing, because it's just easy to just take a couple of open source tools and put something together. I think what I'm riling against is that this provides a really bad experience, because first of all, it provides a very poor information architecture. So people, they get confused. They don't know where they are in your site. And also it's a really bad quality signal, because it's, the experience is not holistic. It's disjointed, and you have different pieces, and it's kind of falling apart a little bit. And the third anti-pattern is the tyrannical toolchain. And tyrannical toolchain, with what I mean with that is that if you have, if you're working with a product that you can't fully configure, or you can't fully make it do what you need, what happens is that you have to have either one person or a group of people that remember how to deal with the tool exactly the way that it's supposed to be used. So what you end up with is probably most of the time one poor guy or girl who's the product owner of the APIs and whose job it is to go and deal with whatever black magic they need to do to get content on the dev portal. And I think the issue there is that not enough of the constraints have been put into the system, because of which people have to keep the constraints in their own heads and keep track of what they're doing and making sure that they're doing the right thing. So like these are the 3 main anti-patterns that I'm seeing in the dev portal space when I'm talking with people, when I'm having initial conversations, and when I'm or just looking around on dev portals on the internet. And all of them are to some extent related to the forms of complexity that I'll be talking about. But I think all of these 3 are reasons, at least in my head, to start thinking about a CMS as like a centralized way to publish your API documentation, to publish, to create it like a unified experience for developers or business owners that come to look at your developer portal to find out more about your APIs and maybe to start doing integration. So like the API freezer, probably people are not finding it because it's not really a dev portal. Frankensite, people are getting a little bit worried because they're not sure if this is going to be around for a long time because it looks like a prototype. And in the theoretical toolchain, people have a hard time putting content into the site. So, I've heard the story from some people that started working just with a bespoke JavaScript-based dev portal, where the product owner ends up managing this giant HTML blob that's like the important piece of their dev portal. So that's kind of like the three anti-patterns that I've seen. That probably indicates that you should be thinking about a CMS. I don't know if this is recognizable. If you've seen something like that, if you want, just send me a message in the chat. I would love to hear if any of this rang home. Yeah. Okay. So, and these are kind of like the end results of complexity not properly managed. Because there's a whole bunch of different sources of complexity in, I think actually today in this age where we're so much connected and there's so many network effects and the world is changing so fast, I think that actually probably most of our work is about dealing with complexity. I think actually APIs and API programs are about decoupling organizations from each other and creating standardized interfaces that allow them to couple in new ways to deal with that increased level of complexity. So, but at the same time, your developer portal needs to deal with different sources of complexity that might be coming from inside of your organization, might be coming from your customers, might be coming from partners, might be coming from technology. And this is like the first big source of complexity that most people are aware of, is like just thinking about maintenance of the technology that you use. If you start from scratch, if you start building something bespoke, you're going to end up owning a tool and having to maintain it and having to keep up with whatever the communities that built those tools are changing the tool into. And that can often be a lot of work that people often forget. And yeah, it's definitely good before you get started to think about, okay, yes, we can do a really quick prototype with like a quick one-off prototype using open source technology, but what is our maintenance strategy, and how long are we going to be able to keep it running? Now, we also use open source, so I'm definitely not bashing open source. It's more this, yeah, like it's easy to, it's like a free kitten. It's easy to get a kitten, but you have to keep feeding it. And I think it's that analogy that's important to remember. The next is the audience, and who are you serving? Because often what I see is that when people go build dev portals, they only think about developers. And while it's true that developers are the main audience for a developer portal, they're not the only audience. There will be business owners, people that are more less technical, that don't know how to code, that will go in and evaluate APIs to see if they will be able to build whatever they're trying to build with your APIs before they go in and pull in a developer to actually do the execution of that. Just evaluating the trustworthiness of an API, evaluating the business model that they'll be able to build up together with you using that API. All of these things are things that business owners will come and look at your dev portal for most likely, because that's probably where they can find that information. It might be that you have it on your marketing site, but probably you have to have some sort of less flowery version of it, like a more down to earth, like here's the raw deal, this is what you're going to get. Something like developer marketing-ish that people can go and check out. Because there's like a dev portal is a communication nexus, and this was like what I just talked about was just consumption, but there's also the production, like the authoring process, because the dev portal is a communication nexus where different audiences come together to communicate with each other about the APIs that you have in your organization. There's the teams in your organization, like the support, sales, marketing, operations, and product. They probably have something to say about what needs to be on the dev portal. Maybe they even want to go and author your dev portal. And if so maybe you need some functionality that allows them to go in your portal and make their own changes. There's the people of the API team, obviously, the API developers, but also the technical writers and the developer advocates. Often people forget about the technical writers and the evangelists. I've seen a lot of teams where it's just developers and product and like one product owner for the APIs. If you don't have technical writers, you probably should be thinking about this, or at least think about having an author, an editor who can review the content that your team is producing, and read up on developer advocates. DevRelCon is a really good event where you can learn more about that. And then obviously the communities that you're trying to target with your dev portal. And all these audiences need to interact with this portal as consumers and as producers of content. And that like forms a fairly complex picture. Besides that, there's also organizational complexity. It's important to, in the API world, I got to know about Conway's Law, which is kind of interesting because Conway is still alive. So he's a professor in the US who's got this law named after him. Conway's Law is interesting because it basically states that an organization will produce a communication tool. Like when an organization wants to produce a communication tool, that communication tool by default will reflect the structure of that organization. That's a lot of words. What it means is that when you have multiple silos in your organization, every silo will need their own place to manage some of the content. Even if you have like something overarching, you're not going to change your organization by adopting a communication tool that disregards the structure of your organization. If you do that, then most likely your dev portal will fail. It's better to start, like if you really want to change your organization, you have to first start thinking about how to affect that change. Your dev portal might be part of the solution of helping you making the change happen, like through an Amazon-style API effort where you mandate that everybody has to have APIs or get fired. Probably wouldn't recommend it, but so if you build that way, you need to think about the structure of your organization. So what we typically see in in a lot of our larger customers that have divisions across different countries that have grown through acquisitions and stuff like that, is that they have multiple business units that are not necessarily working together all that much, but still they would like to create like one single place where everybody can go and discover APIs and find APIs that they might need. Then probably you need some sort of access control model to be able to accommodate that. And this is one of the biggest areas where it gets really hairy really quickly with if you're not using a CMS. CMSs have all of this worked out. Like in Drupal, these are 6 forms of access control that we can use to build an access model that works for your organization. But if you're working with a generated site where you're using Markdown and you're generating HTML artifacts that you're publishing, basically this gets very hairy, because how are you going to do access control? I've heard some people talk about Java Web Tokens, but it's not that easy. So the beauty of a CMS is that the CMS does not generate one version of the content that is going to be shown for people. It's basically creating this on the fly based on access control and permissions that you've set up in the system. So different people can have different experiences in your portal. You can use that to create a bespoke experience, just to improve the experience for different types of people. But you can also use it to revoke access and to prevent someone from accessing certain parts of the content, or by giving authoring permissions to different groups of people for different parts of your content. So stuff like that is the bread and butter of CMSs, and it's pretty complex to do that in another system. Or either you have to build some complex access control on your code repo or something like that. It's not that straightforward outside. And then there's also this aspect of the authoring experience, because what I often see, so I see two types of cases most of the time. So you have the marketing folks one, and you have the technical folks one. So if the marketing folks who are driving the effort, then probably you end up with a CMS where you have to go and author everything, and you're like logging in. So when a new API comes out, the developer has to log in into the CMS system to like go and create the API in the system. Developers don't typically like that much. On the other hand, if this was an effort driven by developers, then most likely you end up with like a static site builder with a CI/CD process to generate your site. And if you want to go and edit something, if you want to change the text on a certain page, you have to go into the code repo and make those edits in the code repo. And marketing people, they get frightened. They're probably saying, well, sorry, I'm not going to touch this. Like, there's code here, maybe it's going to explode. So they'll go and ask you to go and make the changes, which is suboptimal. So what we've been trying to do is to combine those two into one tool where you can have both authoring experiences, so that no matter what kind of persona you have that wants to add content to your site, no matter if they're very technical or more businessy, if they're used to working with help tools, or if they're used to working in a pull request-based workflow, that we can bring all of these authoring experiences into one single tool, so that different types of people can have a different experience that fits more with their profile. The way we do that is we have a page builder that allows less technical people to build landing pages using a form-based interface, where they can combine different elements into a page like this that's responsive, that already takes some of the colors from your brand into account. Like this is using Zero Gravity. It's a theme that we developed. Out of the box, it comes with these colors, but what we normally do with customers is that we customize the color palettes to fit to the brand style guides and letter types and stuff like that. And then you end up with an interface, something like this, where you can go and edit content, and then marketing people can go in and make changes. The other authoring experience is for technical people, where they can author Markdown files, JSON files. They can author the OpenAPI spec, and all these different elements can then either be combined into a single API entity. So, for example, we had one customer where for every single API, they had an OpenAPI spec, they had a Markdown description with the features and benefits, So they had a JSON file with I think it was with the keywords and the categories that needed to be added to a certain API, and all of that was sucked in through CI/CD to update the content in an API entity on the dev portal. So if you had, like, they had actually literally hundreds of APIs that they had developed these templates for, that were filled out by developers in the code repository, and then those got built into this dev portal that combined all of that information into a single object that then is discoverable because you can use faceted search and things like that. So what we do with the Drupal CMS-based strategy is that we take the both or the best of both worlds, where we can have automated uploads and CMS capabilities. And CMS capabilities, that's not just page builders, but that's also workflows, approval processes if you need them, certain metadata that needs to be extracted from OpenAPI spec files, and et cetera, et cetera. Another big source of complexity is compliance and governance. And this is, I think, the nature of complexity is that you can't predict it, and it's always evolving, and that you need to be able to adapt. And if you're alone doing the adapting, it's a lot more expensive. And so, and I think it makes sense to think about, like, what community can you plug in, or what partner can you work with that can help you with addressing some of that complexity, at least, without you having to do it all on your own. And what complexity you get here will very much depend on your governance landscape. That could be internal governance from your organization, but could also be external governance. So internally, you might have like an API design workflow that you need to go through, from planning to designing to developing, with quality assurance before you deploy, quality assurance while it's in operation, and then, you know, a structured way to retire an API. You could also have automated documentation reviews to make sure that your APIs are following your style guides of your organization, and that it's you know, that certain elements are there that need to be there, that certain quality checks on language, on links, on things like that they happen automatically. Security can be a big one, password policies and stuff like that. Regulatory constraints, like financial industry, we have a lot of customers that had to deal with PSD2. Now, some of this might be changing as we go along. Same with other industries like pharmaceuticals and so on. Language context. So far, most of the dev portals I've seen are all just English, but I've heard a very strong case at one of our events in London by Atsushi, who's a developer evangelist from Japan, who talked about the need for, like, conceptual documentation in Japanese to make sure that developers would understand what the different concepts we're doing in an API, and that you know, they're good enough in English to be able to decipher the reference docs, but maybe they don't understand certain basic concepts, and explaining those in their native language is going to make things a lot easier. Similarly, in Hispanic countries or in China, can definitely be a problem. And then also there might be regulatory requirements where, like in Belgium, as far as I know, so far nobody's doing it yet. But you know, we have language laws that are pretty strict about communication. So it would surprise me if at some point in the future, people will not start saying, like, well, actually, you know, we have to have at least a business documentation in Dutch and in French and in German. And another field that I'm really, like, I would really like to do more for and I think there's very little that's being done right now. It's accessibility for developer portals. There's already regulatory requirements for this, but what I've seen is most of our customers don't really have the budget or the bandwidth to work on this. But it's something that we would like to work on as part of our product to give a better experience, not just for people with disabilities, but also for people that are maybe distracted or that just want to be more productive using some of the same technologies. A very quick check. We have 22 minutes still to go. The rest is shorter, so we're going to go quicker through it. Are there any questions at this time? No, not yet. Okay. Then I'll continue. So next, I want to talk a little bit about business model complexity. It's very short. It's basically, thinking ahead of what is going to be the role of my APIs in our business model. Do we need to monetize them? Do we need analytics on a portal? Do we need to expose that to customers? Do we need some way to allow people to try things out before they commit? Things like that, where you might need certain integrations, or there can be a lot of complexity here, like with transfer pricing or something like that. And thinking ahead about it can make sense. Don't go too crazy. Don't go build like a castle in the sky for when your APIs are going to make money. Like, take it iteratively. Be safe. Don't make crazy investments before you know that you have a certain business case for things. But I think overall, addressing these problems is easier with technology landscapes where it's already been done and there's already technologies for it. Content complexity. This is something. So one is like, what documentation do you need to display, and where is it sourced from? But there's also an aspect to this is what is your content model, and how do you need to structure your information? Are there certain parts of your content model that are going to be different depending on the people that are going to watch it? So for example, we had a customer where they had APIs with parameters that were different depending on who was watching the API documentation. So like partner 1 needed to use parameter 1, partner 2 needed to use another parameter. I've heard people challenge the, if that's the best architecture, but if there's a business case for it, it might mean that you have some form of complexity in your API model, where you need to be able to show different parts to different people, and that can be an area where Drupal and CMS can help. We normally store open API specifications as a file in the system, and then we render them. But there's ways to extract information, like from a specification file, like using the X property field in Open API spec. We could use that to target different audiences with a specification, like saying like to the portal, hey, here's a spec, and by the way, it's coming from this team, and all of our partners can see it, but it's not generally available. Stuff like that you can build into the portal, so that when those APIs come in, they automatically get tagged with the right information, the right metadata that will get them displayed in the proper way. So, and things like departments, functional domain, data domains, stuff like that, different documentation components, elements that help you with your information architecture to make it easier for people to find their way through. It's harder to do that in static sites. Like, you have to build your own way of thinking about it, and your own plugin and extractor to build that information in, and then developers have to remember to fill in that field in template, or to, or have to remember that they need to add this one part to their markdown files to be able to get the static site generator to do that trick. With CMS, you can have content that's pushed in the CMS and then augmented as you go, maybe extracting some content from the files. It could also be that you have multiple sources for your files. Like we've had organizations that want to publish from partners. So they want to create like an API marketplace where there's multiple partners that are delivering content that needs to get published. We've had organizations where there's just different departments that don't want to give access to their repos to each other. So stuff like that, where you might have different sources for your content that all need to be shown on the same portal, and stuff like that can be set up using a CMS, especially with the Doxys code approach that I've explained earlier. We had a global travel company. This is a story about the CI/CD, where basically we had the OpenAPI spec file that got pushed, plus all these other files, like I told it earlier, with the JSON files and so on. And it then got built into a single content entity, API entity, that could be searched on and filtered on. Okay. Next is design. Most of our customers have a corporate style guide. It's just a common thing, it's a given. And so if you need to deal with that, it might mean that if you're using off-the-shelf products that are less configurable, that you can't fully make it look the way that it has to look. Now, should you necessarily make your dev portal look exactly the same way as your main website? Potentially not. I think it depends a little bit on how much effort you want to do on keeping that up to date and maintaining that. But having the flexibility to create a good-looking dev portal that's coherent is really important. This talks to the Frankensite principle that I talked about earlier. We've got 2 base templates. Zero Gravity is the one that we've implemented so far. It has a bunch of screens for different API-specific use cases, different templates for different types of pages that we typically see in developer portals. So we've already built all of this. So you can just, with a product, you can just take it and then use it to build it. A CMS has typically this ability to create different template files or to source content blocks from different areas that then get built into a single page. So that kind of functionality is also harder to get without a CMS. With the CMS, you can also then, like with Drupal, you can personalize the design in the theme much easier. You could build a fully custom theme if you want to, without having to like rip it out, because there's a stricter separation between content and presentation that has already been built out, because there's 15 years, or I don't know, it's more than 15 years of experience doing this kind of things. Yeah, so then, like using things like the page builder to build pages. The 9th is developer experience, and we've seen some cases where our customers need customizations to be able to address certain aspects of their developer experience. Like if you have IoT APIs, maybe you want some way to integrate an interface that shows the status of the IoT test device that people can call using an API or something like that. And like, dealing with the different steps of the journey, both for the downstream journey for people that are using APIs and for the upstream journey, the people that are creating APIs, can be different depending on your organization and can add additional complexity. Like if you're using Docker for all of your development, that maybe you have Docker images for certain test cases or something like that, and maybe you need like a special way to explain how you're going to do that or how you're going to set that up. So like thinking also not just about API consumption, but also about how your internal dev portal will enable API creation and adoption. That can be like an important form of complexity. Also custom integrations with custom sandbox and other stuff happens. And I'm going to skip this one. Then one but last is independence. Is do you want to own the bricks? What I've seen sometimes happen is that customers will do this Frankensite, and then some of the elements are like a SaaS tool that they can't guarantee that it's going to be available forever. We've seen there was one of the API gateways both a dev portal solution and then closed it down so that the customers of that solution would start using their other solution. And then they like, we had some of those come to us and say, well, actually, we were really, really upset about this, and we would like to have a portal now that we can own. It's like thinking about having a solution where you can potentially own the bricks. That can be important. One question I've had from customers is like, oh yeah, so actually we would like to use an API as a service, yeah, we're just going to trust the startup or scale up that developed this API as a service, and we want to build our JavaScript front end against that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but what if that's startup or scale up gets both, and for people rather than for technology, or if something happens to that startup, have you thought about that? And I think with our solution, we work with open source content management system, Drupal. So if you we can run it as a SaaS service or a SaaS-like service where we maintain it, support it, and so on. But you can always download it and own it if you need to, or if you want to move somewhere else. Yeah, this is our motto and how we think about all of this stuff. Thinking about open SaaS, PaaS, yeah. And then the last point is optionality. It's like, what are the things that you currently don't think about that you probably will need, and will you be able to add them to your dev portal? It's often I see people just build something and then they end up in a dead-end street because it's a very limited tool and it's not really customizable. So I'm thinking about this ahead of time and thinking about some of the functionality that CMS might offer, like for example, SEO. How do you do like really proper SEO in a developer portal? There's I don't think a lot of attention is being spent on that with CMSs that comes out of the box, because it's part of the marketing landscape, and things like that can be interesting to think about. These are more resources. We'll share this presentation. I think all of you are already on our newsletter. Have a look at the DevPol Awards and API the docs. And yeah, there's more recordings from talks that I've done at different locations, like one in DevCon Tokyo. Mark, who's on the line, Agi is currently not online, but Mark is he's our partner for the North American market, so he can help if you have any questions, or you can ask Agnes also, or you can email me at christoph@pronovix.com. It's K and F, and with any questions, or if you send it to info@pronovix.com, it will also arrive. And then I think that leaves us with a couple of minutes for further questions. If anybody has things that they want to hear a little bit more about, or things they didn't understand, or whatever, just give a shout out.
Hi, Christoph. This is Mary Rose here.
Hi, Mary Rose.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you about, you mentioned monetization there for APIs. Is this something that you work with the workflows within Drupal and the integration with the payment gateways and PCI compliance and all that area? Is this something that you've worked with before and can specialize in? And
so we've done like our first dev portal that we did together with Apogee that kind of got us all started. It was for a GPS company. That was with a big payment gateway integration component. So we know how Apogee works with. I think you're an Apogee customer, right?
yes.
Yeah. So I knew that, but also for the other people. So Apogee has a certain way of doing monetization. So they have their payment gateway with WorldPay, as far as I remember. So we've done a re-architecting where we integrated with another payment gateway for a customer using the e-commerce solutions that are built for the community. So there's also a monetization integration that was developed by the Apogee. Like it was another partner that's the development of that part, but it's something that our developers have been watching and have very strong opinions about because they've done some of that work previously. But yeah, we have experience with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? If there's no further questions, then I think we can end a little bit earlier. So let me see. I think I had my. No, actually, I didn't have. I need to add it. So my email is christoph@pronovix.com, or as you've seen, mark@pronovix.com. That's where you can reach us. Okay. Then thank you very much for joining. And
thank you, Christoph.
Yeah, and we'll talk soon, Marinos.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.